Coming up on the Leadership Growth Podcast. Taking that time to audit how you spend your time is eye-opening. It truly is. But then you ask that question, okay, well, how many hours as a leader should I spend in one-on-one meetings? What percentage of my time? How often should I meet with them? And I think those are questions that it's going to be individually based answers. You know, you hate to say the classic, well, it depends answer, but it really does. One thing I'll counsel is often I'm coaching folks when they're recognizing, okay, I've got 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 direct reports. How do I meet with them every week? And do all of them need to meet with you every week? Do you need to meet with each one at the same cadence? Or do you recognize that some you might need to meet with more often than others? And the ones you meet less often with probably aren't going to feel slighted. Especially going back to the gem, if you include them in the decision of how often you're meeting.
Hey everyone, welcome to the next episode of Leadership Growth Hour. I'm Daniel Stewart, joined by my brother Peter Stewart. We're here to talk about fantastic ideas, tools, and tips to help elevate your ability to be effective every day as a leader. Let's dive on in. Peter, nice to see you.
Good to see you as well. And thanks all the listeners for joining us again. It's
Absolutely.
Always good.
Well, let us start off with something interesting that we have learned this week. Peter, what has stood out amid your various travels and consulting and coaching this week?
Man, it's been a fun, crazy week. Don't you love those? As we're recording this at the end of the week, so many things have happened. But I heard an interesting fact about generational shifts in the workplace. We learned that by the end of this year, Gen Z, also known as Zoomers, will overtake Boomers in the workplace, meaning there will be more Gen Z employees in the workplace than baby boomers, which is a fascinating concept to think about, just the shift in the overall perspective. Especially, I think we've raised Zoomers as they are in the workplace. It's like, wow, taking over the boomer generation.
So it's happening. It's this year when it's happening.
This year.
Yeah.
Yep.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
And with that, I have some insight, another actually large demographic shift, potential demographic impact related to the number of countries that are having elections this year.
Really?
I learned this week from a client that there are 50 countries this year that will be having elections.
50.
50.
Wow. That seems like a lot, but to be candid, I've never stopped to think about how many countries are simultaneously having an election year.
Oh, and so clearly the U.S. and then so many other countries. And you think,
really? There's going to be an election in this country?
Sarcasm. I love it, Peter. Thank you for the sarcasm. So imagine 50 countries. Now, there's 194, something like this. I could be wrong in terms of total recognized countries in the world, maybe a little less. It kind of fluctuates. How many of those have representative democracies? I'm not sure, but nonetheless, 50 countries. Yeah. A lot.
That's quite a bit, yes.
And you think about the transitions of power that will be happening this year across so many countries, from perhaps generational shifts, who will then take over as leaders, so many different perspectives, changes in policies. Talk about levels of change, which one can then be more hesitant and challenged about, or it can be full of hope and opportunity, where we could then continue to change and evolve and be better in some ways. So I thought that was just remarkable, the amount of change on a global stage.
I love those little data points that just make you pause and recognize how much bigger everything is than the bubble we can operate in each and every day. Not only just our bubble geographically, but just our bubble of perception.
Yeah. Yeah.
So thanks for sharing that. Well, now I want to go and get a list and track kind of, okay, what's happening. And with all that change, and think of every year, if you're just speculating that there might be 50 countries, it really is amazing how relatively stable the world seems to be.
Apparently, right.
Apparently.
Stable in what way, though, is always a great one to try.
Because there's so much shift and change and all those sorts of things. Wow. Huh. Okay. Thanks for sharing. So let's now take a look in the memory lane segment. We do love trivia. We do love little facts, and that's been a part of life for us as a family. What is a memory you've been having this week, Daniel?
So as I was thinking about some memories, I remember how much Dad would talk about the leadership gems. And these leadership gems he would use in his seminars all the time. And he would interrupt himself in the middle of talking about something. And he'd say, write this down. Right, and this is a one-liner, some sort of great gem, some idea, and he would share with everybody. And of course, we would hear all of these, and we would sometimes help write them, or we'd come up with new suggestions. And Mom, she would write a lot of them as well. I mean, she would come up, and she and my dad would talk, and then she'd go write them up, and then my dad would use them. And so I'm bringing this out. So we have the 52 leadership gems. That's right. We've compiled years ago the 52 best ones, and we'll put a link, of course, to the book if you want to get it. But anyway, I just want to share one gem, and it's one of my favorites, and Dad shared it many, many times. You ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. The gem is gem number 8. People tend to support what they help create or decide. I mean, I have Dad's.
That's so good. Say it again, just so everybody captures the gem.
People tend to support that which they created or decided. And I have Dad's voice in my mind describing this. And the power is that it matters how to involve other people, because inevitably change is personal, and how we then invite people to participate in the change matters. And this is what we were taught from a young age. It's like, you want somebody to agree with you, work with you, how are you going to involve them?
Mm-hmm. Bring them in young. I love that you're bringing up this concept of gems. That I think once you're introduced to that, you can view the world in a different way, because now you're hearing gems all over the place. So they're just little phrases, sayings that pack a punch. Yeah. They just teach you something. And so that one you just shared about getting people involved, it is powerful. And it's and we would learn as we were sitting in our scout troops, learning, okay, how do we get everybody to want to go on this hike or to go on this camp out or learn how to tie these knots, throughout our professional career as well. It applies from the scout room to the boardroom, all sorts of applications. That's a good one.
I love it. And you even bring up the scouting. I mean, both you and I were heavily involved in scouting, and we had so many experiences where you have to try to help get the other guys to go along with stuff. And remembering, if I ask them what they think or get them involved, it's going to increase my chance so much of getting this thing done.
Oh, it's very true. And so this is a little memory. So I was a scoutmaster back in Kansas and had a troop, and they learned best when I could set it up as a competition. Mm. And they were sick of learning how to tie knots. They didn't want to tie knots. So I thought, well, let's incorporate something a little fun. So we're on this lake, And I said, okay, let's do a competition involving fire. Why? Because scouts enjoy fire. And their goal was to to build a raft and then start a fire on top of that raft, put it out in the lake, and then the other boys would throw rocks at it trying to get the fire out. And whoever had the last fire standing won. So they had to figure out how to lash this little raft together, and it had to fit, under a Rubbermaid bin of, it was like 3x2 size. So they weren't massive things. And they did. And so here they were tying all these ropes, lashing together. They built some really strong little rafts and some dang good fires as they were glowing as the sun set. It was just a fun image.
Peter, that's a fantastic story. It's almost, I'm picturing the Viking kind of burial approach with the arrow of fire. Okay, not exactly, but wow. Oh, that's great. Fantastic.
Anyway, and you get them involved. They help decide and add on to the rules of the activity. And so it was good. Thanks for sparking the memories. Hopefully, as listeners, you're sitting here thinking, what are some of those gems and adages that have stuck with you? And hopefully you pass them on. It's a great way to help transfer and share a little bit about your own philosophy of leadership, because you know why it stuck with you.
So often, I know you do this too, as I'm coaching executives, it's inviting them then to remember what are the gems that they have learned in their career. How do you write them down? How do you memorialize it? How do you remember it? How do you share it? Because, we have 52 leadership gems. That's a great place to start. But what are the things that are near and dear to your heart? And how do you remember it? How do you teach it to others to be able to help inspire them? And how do you build it into your regular parlance or discourse every day?
Yeah. Because so much of leadership is, as we've touched on so many times, and I imagine we'll continue to do so in future episodes, it comes down to how you communicate. Communicate your thoughts, communicate your philosophies, communicate your vision. And these gems help solidify it for yourself. But then it's just a very compact, effective way to communicate expectations and thoughts and philosophies to others.
Yeah. Okay, well then, how about this for a segue? Communication gems. And now let's talk about the communication in one-on-one meetings.
Ooh.
Because that's the topic today. How to have a good one-on-one meeting. What does that look like? The importance and power of it. I'm telling you, that is one of the most important things that a leader can do effectively to be able to have effective relationships, to build that rapport, is to have regular, and I'll say regular one-on-one meetings with each person on their team. Whether it's weekly, whether that's monthly, you can decide the cadence. But to have it, and so now let's talk about what to even include in the one-on-one meetings.
And I think even before we dive into there, Daniel, it's recognizing the value of these above and beyond the team meeting. So I think sometimes we can get, have that staff meeting, have the weekly team meeting, whether it's the Monday or Wednesday or whatever meeting. These are in addition to those.
Yeah.
They're the one-on-one tag ups, they can be called, the check-ins, they don't have to be super long, but they're so powerful. So back to your question, how do we set these up and how do we make them effectively?
And so let me, as you like to say, pull on that thread. So
I do say that.
you do, and I'm pulling. I'm going to pull.
Please pull.
So you talk about the team meeting, and to make sure that people do not look at the team meeting as if that's accomplishing the same conversations that need to happen on the one-on-one.
Yeah.
And now let me go the other extreme. So several years ago, I was doing a director leadership program at a large manufacturing organization. And as an activity, I had everybody pull out their phones and start going through their calendar. And I wanted them to identify how they spend their time and to begin bucketing all the different kinds of meetings that they have. And okay, so it was like 3 to 5 minutes of like silence, and people are like, "Oh, yeah, okay, yeah." They're just kind of mumbling a little bit, but
Because there's a lot of meetings.
tons of meetings. And then I'll never forget this one guy. He looked up and he's like, "What?" And everybody in the room, and we're like, "Yeah, are you doing okay?" He's like, "I spend 16 hours every week in one-on-one meetings." And all of us were still like, "Okay, is that good or bad? What is?" And he was like, "That is way too much. I am spending so much time with every single person. I do not need that. Is so overkill. We are not having productive uses of that time." And so that then fostered the other extreme, because sometimes managers can spend so much time with each person and not be as efficient. And he was saying, this is going to shift. I'm going to do an experiment. I'm going to meet with them every other week and see if they're still going to be just fine, because I can set up goals so that they can then not need me as much. Because that's what he was recognizing, how much he was being needed, when in fact, was he really needed that much as well?
Yeah. No, it's a great story. And you can hear that reaction, and it's the ahas. And I've had that similar sort of reaction from folks as I've done a similar exercise, because taking that time to audit how you spend your time is eye-opening. It truly is. But then you ask that question, okay, well, how many hours as a leader should I spend in one-on-one meetings? What percentage of my time? How often should I meet with them? And I think those are questions that it's going to be individually based answers. You know, you hate to say the classic, well, it depends answer, but it really does. One thing I'll counsel is, often I'm coaching folks when they're recognizing, okay, I've got 7 or 8 or 9 or 10 direct reports. How do I meet with them every week? And do all of them need to meet with you every week? Do you need to meet with each one at the same cadence? Or do you recognize that some you might need to meet with more often than others? And the ones you meet less often with probably aren't going to feel slighted. Especially going back to the gem, if you include them in the decision of how often you're meeting.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yeah, I find competence, how experienced they are in the skill or the task that's needed, how urgent and how important are the skill or are the tasks they need to pay attention to, will help fluctuate and determine how frequently.
Yeah. So that's a good one. So then, now that we've set a few factors to consider on the frequency, how do we make these effective? How do we really make sure this time we're spending is effective? Because they don't have to be an hour long. They don't even have to be 30 minutes long. They can be 15. It's going to vary. But there's a few things that we can do to help them be more effective. What's one of the first ones, Daniel, that comes to mind?
Yeah. So this goal setting idea is so critical. And in fact, I often think of really good one-on-ones really need just a few questions. One of the questions, what have you done this past week? Another question, what will you do this next week? In other words, what are the goals you're going to be setting? The third question is, what are you learning? And the fourth is, how can I support you? Yeah. And we can come back and touch on some of these, but let's focus on this goal setting approach to be able to be really clear. What are you going to do and by when? When are you going to follow up with me? Who do you need to be involved in this effort? Especially as we talked about with the gem, how much buy-in do you need from others? What input do you need from others? What report, what data, what any of the supplies, equipment, what are the goals? And to be clear about the timeliness and how concrete it is. So it's not left like, okay, you're good. You just got general ideas. Which maybe for really established folks who have been doing the job for a while is sufficient. Yeah. However, setting clear goals that are written, that both of you are in agreement on, critical.
Yep. And to elaborate on that, it's goals not just at a tactical level. It's not just what's the next project you're getting done, or when's this deliverable, or how are you preparing this for this next audit or this monthly business review or whatever it might be. What are the broader long-term development-based goals as well? And I think it's striking that balance so that the focus of these meetings is not always in the immediate, tactical, urgent fire, but it's helping make sure that you're reserving time to talk about some of those overarching, more career development type of conversations.
So let me ask you, you bring up the development focus. How much should you be talking about development, your personal development, in one-on-ones? How frequently? What does that look like?
And the classic answer is it depends. But what I'd say is it's going to vary for each. A part of that depends on what is the cadence of the team meeting. How much of those tactical conversations are talked about there? Is that the cadence and culture of your team? How much is the frequency of whether it's through Slack or Teams, the chat, the emails, those updates that happen? But it's just ensured you got to make sure that you're reserving time for both and you're not getting too lopsided. That's just, I'd say every meeting you need to touch on to a certain degree the tactical. Maybe not every meeting you have to look at the high level development. So maybe if you think, at least every fourth conversation, you should touch base on the development. Maybe it's a rule of thumb. What would be yours?
Yeah, I'd go at it maybe a little different approach. And on a quarterly basis, that's where I'd recommend having more of a development conversation, even semi-annually. But what can show up on the regular one-on-ones is how are we linking your strengths to what you have to do, and to acknowledge that so that the person is aware that you know what drives you, what you're wanting to work on, what you're trying to accomplish personally, professionally, and it's connected. Because one of the most important things for an employee to see it from their manager or boss is that you know what drives me, you know what I like to do, and you're keeping that in mind as you're making assignments.
You are, and that you're not letting time go by where you're not following up on those. So you might have those quarterly or semi-annual conversations where you're really setting those goals, but you want to make sure there isn't too much time, or at least there isn't an update or a check-in on what you're doing so that there is the alignment and the syncing with those goals.
Yeah. And it helps you then take them into consideration, take their needs, take what's going on. Now, what about the connection idea? How much of the time in a one-on-one do you need to spend connecting with each other, building that rapport or reinforcing that rapport or finding out the personal side of things? Because, some leaders are like, nope, I don't dive into that. It's just, we have a job to do and others are like, please tell me about everything that's going on. What are some guidance? How much do you focus on that in the one-on-one?
If you're having a relatively short time, like let's say you've got a half an hour and you're meeting regularly, you're not going to want to spend more than 20% of that time on just the human connection, unless you're really focusing on building that connection. Because that's the tendency. You don't want the entire time taken up by discussing these issues when you're not getting to some of the more core issues that are needed. So it requires a little bit of nuance and understanding of, do they really need to dive into this today deeper? Or do we have to get to the other topics at hand? And that's where having that plan in place of what the meeting is for really helps. Each of these meetings, you need to have an agenda. What are the talking points they're sharing with you ahead of time? Are there really critical things? And the times where there are less critical things, great. Then you have a little bit more flexibility to spend to do more of that relationship building. Don't cancel these just because there might not be incredibly pressing, urgent issues. That's a gift to actually have those one-on-ones where you can focus on a little bit more of that relationship piece. But you never want to let it go without touching base on it. But it's letting them lead that and guide you a little bit on what they need.
The thing I would add to that is to remember that every conversation happens on two levels. The first level is the level of content, the actual topics themselves, the tasks, the assignments, who needs to be at the meeting, etc. But then there's a deeper level. And this other level is all about the relationship and the connection. And so as a leader, as a manager, you need to be paying attention to both levels. And when you start hearing people repeating themselves or getting louder as they talk about the content, that's often an indication that they may not feel heard, or that there is something else other than the content that which is bothering them or they need to talk about. And that's where, as a leader, you need to then be able to shift and begin understanding, wait a minute, how's the person really doing? Do they belong? Do they feel like they belong? Do they feel like they're being respected for their competence, for the ability to make a difference? There was a chief technology officer I was working with several years ago, and he would take things so personal. And he worked his head off. Like, he did great work and he inspired his team. But outside of his team, he would get really, really defensive if anybody then came in and said, hey, you're behind on this, or I have a question about this. And he would just put up all sorts of defenses around this. When I would see people have success was when they stopped talking around a potential challenge and they instead came in and said how much they appreciated all that he did and recognized his work. And then they were able to shift into the content as well. Some listeners might be hearing that. They might be gagging. They might be, that's terrible. Oh, that's awful. However, we're all human. And we all have various levels of needing to be able to be acknowledged and recognized. And that is important. And to frame up so that the other person can feel acknowledged and important, critical, so that you can then have great conversations around the content itself.
Oh, it's so important. And I think it's also critical that you respect how much an individual is willing to disclose. And the time to build these relationships is not during the crisis resolution. So that's why you're asking the questions, to get to know them, their family, where they've gone on vacation, the things they like to do outside of work. You're asking those questions in a very open way in which they can disclose how much they feel comfortable sharing. And so that way they feel safe, so that when, to your point earlier, is that when they start to repeat themselves, and we're not talking about a stuttering problem, we're not talking about them saying the same thing over and over again, right back to back. Oftentimes it's, this is the fourth time you brought up that system implementation challenge with this team. It doesn't feel like we've resolved this. Let's talk about this a little bit more. And so you've had to pay attention to notice that over the course of the last few days or weeks, they keep bringing this issue up. So then you dive into it and you talk about it, and you're trying to create that safe place in which they really can lay it on the table and say, well, yeah, they never acknowledged the fact that my team actually was preparing and did all the implementation here, and they got the credit, or whatever that issue might have been.
Yeah. There are two other things we want to touch on. Timing, how we respect time, how we are able to have it consistent, and asking great questions.
Yeah.
Asking great questions. As you hear these two things, Peter, what would you say around these two ideas?
On the back, the great questions one, try and ask open-ended questions when possible. It's going to help give you insight into what they're thinking and give them opportunity to share even more than you might even be aware of. So instead of asking, give me an update on the status of this project. Okay, in which you can say, what have you learned this week as you've led this project? Would be an example of an open-ended one. Or what challenge have you faced this week as you've been doing that? Those sorts of questions help to elicit a deeper conversation than just potentially the superficial knowledge of the task at hand.
I think of the what and the how questions. What challenges have you experienced? What risks have you overcome? How did you overcome them? Who did you involve in overcoming those risks?
Mm-hmm.
How are you going to be then able to be successful this coming week? And then you start getting into the, as I mentioned, the who, and then when. When will you be following up with me? How will you be following up with me? What will you be then sharing with me next time we meet?
Yeah.
So much of this is putting it also back on them, because sometimes leaders can, in one-on-ones, they may take all of that accountability onto themselves, like they have to drive the whole thing. No, this is a partnership to be able to be clear that both parties need to come to the table prepared, ready to go, and have clear expectations ahead of time and follow up afterwards. So it's not just a one-off, but it's a consistent pattern that people know that they're going to get their expectations reinforced over and over again, that they'll have a chance to have dialogue, to be able to learn about it, and then they can leave with clarity around priorities so that they can then be successful.
And as they have that clarity, it's helping them realize this isn't just a meeting for the boss, for you as the manager. They're not sitting there trying to just impress. It is, you've level set, identified what the expectations are and the function of this meeting, talking ahead of time. So probably one of the first things to do is have a conversation with, how do we make these meetings more effective? How could our one-on-ones be more useful? That'd be a great question to ask at the next one you have. So that then it can be. But back to the other question of, how do we respect time in these meetings? Because most can keep going. There is usually not a lack of issues to discuss.
Yeah, it's a solid point. And I often find half hour, sometimes an hour, is helpful for one-on-ones, but really a half hour to keep it straightforward, especially if you meet weekly or every other week, to be able to then address the most important things, because it's not just updates. Those can be done on the Teams or Slack or email. It's what discussions that need to happen, and to focus on those discussions and the key risks to be able to then keep in mind to move things forward.
Yeah.
Okay, Peter. A lot of great topics, a lot of great things. Lightning round at the end. What's the one thing that you would tell managers or leaders that they need to do to be able to have a successful one-on-one meeting?
Most important thing, don't cancel them. They get pushed. If I had a nickel every time, I've coached individuals who said, yeah, it keeps getting pushed to the side. It keeps getting pushed to the side. Have them. It is more important to have them than to have a perfect one. So prioritize it and make sure they happen. And then, as we've been talking, it is a two-way meeting. Share what you need to get out of it, and ask them what they need to get out of it. If you're doing that, that's really setting you on the way to have effective meetings, one-on-one.
Yeah.
Okay, Daniel. So the question to you, how do you help ensure that these one-on-one meetings are not viewed as a waste of time?
So 2 words, follow up. Or is that a hyphen word? Follow up.
We'll go with that.
To keep it brief and concise and to make them connected to other conversations and expectations. So it's not just a one-off, and it's not connected to a broader set of goals or strategic objectives. To keep it aligned, to keep it written down, and to follow up with what was said that was going to be done, and to do it, and to expect people to complete assignments, and to be ready to explain why or why not, and what their solutions are to address it. Following up is one of the most important things managers can do to make these one-on-ones effective and to make them not a waste of time. Connect and align with goals and keep it consistent as you follow up.
That's a great point. And how it sends that message that what they do and who they are matter, because you are following up with it. And it makes your words have more currency.
Love it. Well, Peter, great to chat with you. Another great episode of Leadership Growth Hour here, Leadership Growth Podcast, and have a great one. And everybody, thanks for listening. Please don't forget to subscribe, and good luck on your leadership journey.
Thanks. We'll see y'all next time.
If you liked this episode, please share it with a friend or colleague, or better yet, leave a review to help other listeners find our show. And remember to subscribe so you never miss an episode. For more great content or to learn about how Stewart Leadership can help you grow your ability to lead effectively, please visit stewardleadership.com.